Hey, I'm Kamara Rose, and this is Everyday Changemakers. Conversations with social change practitioners about the journey of personal transformation and social transformation.
Look at this situation and put on the glasses of belief. Put on the lens of what's possible and what you're allowed to ask for, and make the change you want to make, and don't take no for an answer.
This week, I'm talking to Joy Friedman, the Director of Organizing for the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, which mobilizes around federal, state, and local legislation, develops congregational leaders, and organizes communities to create a world of justice, compassion, and peace. Joy grew up in Lawrence, Kansas, a small college town where both her parents were professors at the University of Kansas. There were only about 40 or 50 Jewish families in their town of 75,000 people, and Joy grew up feeling different than her peers, outside the mainstream culture. And on top of feeling like an outsider in her community, Joy struggled in her home life when her parents got divorced. Those early experiences were catalysts that would shape her path towards organizing.
Apparently, there was a Sesame Street character when we were little named Polly Darton, who used to put her hands on her hips and go, "I do it by myself." And that's what I used to do too. Like, I just want to have agency, like, since I was really little.
When she was a college student, Joy got connected with the International Areas Foundation, the IAF for short, a school of community organizing based in the teaching of Saul Alinsky, who many people consider to be the founder of modern community organizing.
The first time I met with an organizer, he asked me about my personal stories around power, whether I'd experienced power, being powerful or being powerless. And as I started to answer, I remember he pointed to my head and he said, "Not from there, from here," and pointed to my heart, and made me start to reckon with my own stories of experiences with powerlessness and why I wanted to fight for justice, which entails not only wanting power, wanting the ability to be free and to fight for freedom, but also changing the balance of power in the world.
What was the story that emerged for you in that moment?
So at the time I was 21 and not super examined, hadn't done a ton of self-examination. But at the moment, the story that emerged for me was my experience as a high schooler when my parents got divorced, because it was the most powerless I think I'd felt. And yet my craving, my need to feel like I had the ability to control, to have impact on some aspect of my life was so fierce. So I acted in the only way I could perceive to have power, which was on myself. So I became anorexic really fast. Like, I ended up starting what I thought was a diet in June and was hospitalized in October because I had lost so much weight that my life was in jeopardy. So that was my attempt to have power when in my own life, around my own family, in like a very immediate way. And that's what I ended up telling this like virtual stranger when I first met him, because it was not from my head, but from my heart, my lived experience of feeling really powerless.
Did you have consciousness at that time when your parents were getting divorced and you felt so out of control? Was it a conscious choice that you made of, okay, this area of food is this place that I can control? Or do you feel like you only have that now?
I have it now, and I had it I'm in the hospital. I remember a nurse helping me do that thinking. So I had it soon after, but not at the moment. I didn't plan to almost kill myself through starvation. Like, that wasn't the intention. I think I intended to have control over my life, and I was switching from one school to another and wanted to feel like I could present how I wanted to present. I could be appealing to other people in a particular way. But I think what I experienced, what turned from a diet into, near death, was an addiction of sorts, like not a choice.
That it like took over you.
Yeah. Which is funny. It's funny that it's on some level, it was my story of trying to take control and have power, but I was powerless to it. It was certainly, the Lord Acton quote, power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I fully believe in the opposite, that powerlessness tends to corrupt and absolute powerlessness corrupts absolutely. And that's what I experienced, was feeling a little powerless and then turning it into something without intention. You're right. It wasn't something I was doing with awareness, but it took over for me because it wasn't about the kind of power that is liberating.
It's interesting that was your story of powerless, because I feel like in so much of social change, it's always or often about the systems that are oppressing us or keeping us in bondage. What was the link that you made then of like, I had this personal experience from just my family system and what I needed to do to survive, and linking that to this larger struggle, however you were thinking about it at the time?
In the moment when this organizer, Stephen, asked me that question, I didn't have the bigger link. I just was relating to my own experience of an appetite for power, an experience with powerlessness, and a drive to try to figure out how to have an impact on what I cared about, myself, people I love, broken systems. So it was just my root story. But I think after that, I thought more about the way, in some ways the family system can't quite be associated to a larger system, but also thinking like that was not the only way to have an impact on my life at the time. There were other systems I was inside of that I could have worked to impact, and I could have advocated for myself even within my own family system. And I didn't have those tools. I didn't have that recognition. So I think the next experience I had where I really thought about it, when my parents got divorced, in the end, I think they worked out a deal that was really good for both of them. They were equitable and they did it themselves. But what I experienced was that my mom moved to a part of town that I'd never seen before. I just didn't know. I knew there was like a gated community, and I knew there was where we lived. I didn't know there was another lower echelon where people walked to work because they didn't have cars, where people lived in trailers and, were accessing the social safety net. That was also part of what was happening. And my mom married a graduate student who was, around her age, but had not finished his PhD. So he was still serving as a teaching assistant. That was how he was making money, which was, the money he made was less than $10,000 a year. So I also just got exposed to kind of financial challenge in a way that I hadn't before. All of that, I think, was part of what I was experiencing, but it wasn't the like gut-wrenching day-to-day experience of just feeling like my life, where I slept at night, who was there when I woke up in the morning, wasn't under my control.
Hey everyone, I'm taking a quick pause here to let you know about our guest next week, Reverend Rashad Moore, a minister at the historic Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York.
Working at a church, I realized that there is no perfect church. There is no church where everyone gets along. There's not a church where everything is right. But it's in those everyday moments that you have to be just sensitive enough to the movement of God to realize this was a moment of beloved community. This was a moment of the kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven.
Listen next week to hear how Rashad brings a mindfulness to ministry, a reverence for the everydayness that builds beloved community and celebrates joy. And speaking of joy, back to her story. After that initial soul-searching conversation with the IAF organizer, Joy interned with the IAF for a summer in Chicago, and she came away with a drive to start making change where she was at the time, college.
I'd had this experience my sophomore year where I discovered that I was white, which was not something I'd ever thought of myself as being before, because My town of 75,000 people had 50 Jewish families, and there were just 2 other girls my age who were Jewish in the whole town. I thought that's what I was, which made me different. I felt marginal. Our public schools had Christmas trees and played Christmas carols before and after school, and I couldn't connect. I thought I was Jewish, and that was my definition. And I thought I was without Christian privilege, without access to all the things everybody else experienced and enjoyed. And then I took a class where I learned that actually it was an expectation that I would go to college, that my family did as well as it did both economically and educationally because of the GI Bill, which wasn't something everybody could access, that I could actually expect to be overrepresented in the college population as a Jew and as a white person, that most of the professors that taught our classes would be the same race as me. Like so many things that I'd never realized about myself before, and always thought I was on the margin, but was actually a beneficiary of so many things. And I felt both duped up until that point and exposed to something that was one of the most important things I was learning in school. More important than theorems in calculus, and felt like that was the thing we needed to leave college knowing.
Joy started organizing with other college students to change the curriculum on campus so that incoming students were required to learn about privilege and about difference. And she found that the power that she was missing in her own life was fulfilled in the work of organizing.
Part of the shifting was that I wasn't alone. But I got to experience fighting with other people who helped craft what the fight should look like, what we should be fighting for. And that was so enlivening.
With that initial taste of organizing and the power of community, Joy knew she needed to keep going.
I moved to Boston and organized teenagers, young adults, and sort of got to provide for young people an avenue to feel powerful in exactly the way I hadn't when I was a young person. That was such a healing experience, to believe in myself, to believe in these young people, to believe that we could build a campaign, even if there were major challenges, even if the road we were charting was really steep, that we could have an impact. That experience and helping other people believe in themselves and giving them the opportunity to prove it, that kind of fulfilled everything. Like, not only did systems change and did the balance of power shift, but also like people learned what they were capable of.
How did it change you?
I think I learned what I was capable of. Not only was it about my capability as an individual, but my capability as a leader in a community. Seeing some young people who felt like me and some who didn't at all, who had totally different personalities, and I could coach them, I could encourage them to see themselves as change agents and then make change.
Joy's first campaign with young people in Boston sought to change the recycling policy in their community. But it was much bigger than that.
We consensually agreed to make the world better and to face into the fears that impeded that. Both what we're taught about how power works, about how you interact with the mayor of a city, and what we believed about 15 to 18-year-olds or 22-year-olds. All of that had to be confronted, and we had to agree that we were going to believe in something different, that 15 to 18-year-olds and whatever I was during that time period, 22 to 26-year-olds, could stand down, could make something different happen, could ask people to show up and hold them accountable. Like, look at this situation and put on the glasses of belief, put on the lens of what's possible and what you're allowed to ask for, and make the change you want to make, and don't take no for an answer.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Change is this process, and that people change who they are by having different experiences and coming to new beliefs. That's kind of fascinating to me, that like so much of outward change comes from an internal, even like an idea that's changed or a thought that's changed. Like so much of it is actually in our consciousness, and it then pervades our being, and then we're able to act differently.
It also fascinates me. Like I love that. I think our fears are our beliefs. And part of the job of an organizer is to help people recognize that those are not truths necessarily. They're beliefs, and we could try out other beliefs. And I don't think there's any way to let go of those fears without facing them.
Hey everyone. I'm taking a pause here because if you're anything like me and Joy, then you probably relate to having fears and limiting beliefs that hold you back. So, to help us all out, I developed a resource to support you to uncover those fears, examine the beliefs that are underneath them, which are, spoiler alert, usually false, and try on some new beliefs that help you to take positive action. The guide is called Facing Fear, and you can download it at kamararose.com/resources. The link is also in the show notes. My hope is that it will encourage you to let go of old fears and develop some new, more empowering beliefs. In the words of Asada Shakur, we have nothing to lose but our chains. So go to kamararose.com/resources to download the Facing Fear guide. Okay, back to the conversation.
Coming back to the thing you said about our fears are our beliefs, and we have to face them in order to make change or create a shift. How now today you're the director of organizing within your faith tradition of Reform Judaism. How does that approach or that philosophy, how does that inform the way you're doing your work?
I was just at a training with rabbis 2 weeks ago where we were talking about the fears they have around being controversial, around taking what some people experience as sanctuary, where they don't have to hear about politics. They don't have to hear about the causes of the world's brokenness, but about ways the community is working to address it, which are usually amazing, sweet service projects, or about just the Torah, I guess just the portion of the week that they're reading, and not be pushed to hear about or act on the injustices, the causes of inequality. And this group of rabbis, their fear reminded me of an experience I had when I was organizing in Boston, where another organizer said to a leader who was the leader of the synagogue, like she wasn't ordained, but she made everything happen. Everyone you talked to said, "Oh, Debbie really runs this place." We met with her, and this organizer said, after she spoke for a while and had just told us a story about a staff person at the synagogue taking a project she'd worked on for months, the day after it was set to end, and just tearing it down and throwing it away. And he asked her, "Did you ever say anything about that to the person who did it?" And she said, "No, we're kind of a family here." And he said, "Well, I think that you might be too nice, and this synagogue too small and too much like a family for you to do this work." And she quoted him for like 3 years while she did the work, because that was one belief barrier she had, that she couldn't confront someone who'd broken her heart, who'd treated her unfairly, or it would crash the family. And I feel like that's the story that a lot of these clergy needed to hear, like living with the tension of feeling called to make the world better and feeling terrified that they'll tear apart the community and lose the love and support of their congregants. That's one of the biggest fears I feel like my community faces.
And how do you help them to face that?
This week I spoke to a rabbi who she's she has a disability and has fought for herself, was fought for by her parents, and is the first person with this disability to become ordained as a rabbi, and speaks to groups of hundreds, thousands about disability rights, but doesn't see herself as able to engage her congregation in the efforts around justice. And I was helping her, my conversation with her was all about like why she thinks what she's done around disability rights is any different from what she's now thinking about doing around immigrant justice or criminal justice reform. That she believes they're completely different. She believes she doesn't have the knowledge to make the changes around deportation or around mass incarceration that she does around disability rights. And I think she totally does. I was pushing her to break down that barrier.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, I mean, that internal thing that people have to overcome in order to step out and do something they haven't done before. When you're thinking about people that are in the field, other practitioners in the field, what would be the guidance that you might give people that's helping them to take that step, either for themselves or because they're working to encourage or empower others?
I guess this is part of what I keep referring to about not you alone, but you collectively. I don't think you could read every book on organizing and believe you can do it. I think you have to try with other people, and I think you have to question with other people. Why did it work? Why didn't it work? What are you scared of? What am I scared of? And it's only through that we actually find our agency.
It's funny because I've been having a number of these conversations and they all come back to community. And since you work with so many people and are constantly sort of navigating how do we make choices together, what has been wisdom you've gleaned or things you've noticed about what it takes to work together in community in order to achieve your dreams?
I guess the secret sauce is finding leaders of other people and talking to them and together making the judgment of what that community needs to move forward in that moment and recognizing you may not be right and course correcting. Like that's another principle in organizing, is that all organizing is disorganizing and reorganizing. Like it's trying and seeing how many people show up. It's doing the best you can to hold people accountable to showing up. And then if they don't, figuring out what went wrong. It's figuring out how much time you have, how much need people have to be a part of figuring out what the solution's going to look like and making a judgment and acting. I even think a lot of my people are overanalyzers. Like I could totally find myself in analysis paralysis very quickly. And I can't. Like things move so quickly now. And we live in a space where we're trying to fight things that are urgent, like the number of people getting deported every day, the families that are getting torn apart, the people rotting away in cages and jail. Like all of this is too urgent to perseverate for too long. So I think it's messy, the work of community, and I also think it's imperative.
So what is it that gives you strength? Like what are you calling on a daily basis that's keeping you showing up, working with community every day in order to make this level of impact? What is it that's bringing you to the table every day?
I think a lot of things. I mean, I think what's interesting about the aspect of community is that I don't know if it's like just who I am. Like Joy Friedman is a lonely person, or if it's how I grew up feeling so different from other people, that a lot of why I organize, a friend said this week and it resonated so much, a lot of why I organize is to abate existential loneliness. Like what keeps me going is that most of my days are filled with conversations with other people, where people need me, where I need them, where we rely on each other. That's huge. Another huge part of that is that so many of the people who I work with are working with me because they want to. The rabbis I work with, the lay leaders I work with, no obligation to do this. They're doing it because they can't not do it. And that is so motivating to me. It's not a requirement. It's a calling.
Is there, in closing, an intention that you want to bring, or even like a prayer about what you want to call forth?
There's a prayer that Jews usually say when something is happening for the first time. It's the Shehechianu. And you say three things about God, three appreciations. One is for giving us life. Another is for breathing us, like giving us breath. And then the third is for bringing us to this moment, which actually, as I think about it, is sort of an agency prayer. Like it's not for making the decision for us. It's for sustaining to this moment where I get to decide. So I think that's the intention that I want to bring, is both great appreciation for what I can't control and feel so grateful for, like just surviving to this point and being at this moment, and the opportunity to be full agents, fully empowered people. So the Shehechianu.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being on this podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. Before you go, I just want to remind you that the Facing Fear guide is available for you at kamararose.com/resources. I hope it supports you in your own journey of transformation. If you liked this conversation, please rate it, review it, and share it with friends, family, and colleagues. It is so helpful when you do that, and I really appreciate it. Finally, Everyday Changemakers is a production of yours truly in collaboration with markmedia.org.